Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazisich. Okay, so we are continuing on here in the book of Amos, Divrei Amos, as it's known from the superscription. And this is an exegetical study in the prophecy, poetry, and politics of the prophet Amos. We are in chapter 5 today, so if you have your Bibles, open them up to 5:18 following. Okay, coming once again here then to the Aleppo Codex. Our passage here picks up here with Hoi. So the text goes, Hoi hamit avim et yom Adonai. Lama ze lachem yom Adonai, hu choshek velo or. And then we'll stop here because this goes into verse 2, Ka'asher Yanus Ish, and then it goes on and on from there. But anyhow, so this says, woe to those who are desirous of the day of Yahweh. Why do you have a day of Yahweh? It is darkness and not light. So this is how our text here starts off, and I think we'll look at another little snippet here, continuing on in our next slide. Okay, then continuing on with the Aleppo Codex into the next colophon. And remember, the verse 19 began with Ka'asher Yanus, just as, and then it continues here with Ish, Ka'asher Yanus Ish, just as a man flees, Mipnei Ha'ari Ufega'o Hadov Uva Habayit V'Samak Yado Al Hakir Uneshacho Hanahash. All right, so we'll end that there. So this just says, just as a man flees from before a lion and a bear meets him, and he enters the house and he leans his hand upon the wall, and a serpent bites him. Halo choshek yom Adonai velo or. Ve'afel velo noga lo. So this just says is not the day of Yahweh darkness and not light, gloom and no brightness in it. So we'll just end it there. That's really the first two units. The initial woe cry with the characterization of the people as those who are longing for the day of the Lord. And then he gives an illustration of the inescapability of the day of Yahweh here, with a man fleeing from a lion only to be met by a bear, and somehow he escapes both, enters his house, and he's gasping for breath. He leans his hand upon the wall, and a snake bites him. So this is really, so this is Amos's illustration that there's no escape from the day of Yahweh for the wicked. And it's not going to be a day of light for most Israelites. It's going to be a day of darkness. So this is a really famous passage here in the book of Amos. Okay, then coming here, as I commonly do, we'll have a scholar set the table for us coming to our passage for today. And today we're following Shalom Paul, a Jewish exegete. Although there is no conceptual reason for the juxtaposition of this section to the previous one, it may have been occasioned by two complementary reasons. First is the likely literary tie. The initial hoi, woe cry found in verse 18, is related to the ho cry of verse 16. Second is a conceptual linkage, for here too the prophet abrogates another commonly held idea, as he did in Amos 5:14. God is with us. And to go back to that scripture, it said, seek good and not evil, so that you may live. And it will be that Yahweh, God of hosts, shall be with you, just as you have said. So this becomes something. So just as you have said, that Yahweh, the God of hosts, is with us. So Amos actually heard them saying that. They this is a little peek behind the curtain. So when Amos says, just as you have said, that God of hosts is with us, according to Amos, he's not with them unless they mend their ways. They do good and not evil, right? They love the good and they hate the evil. So what Shalom Paul is saying here is that Amos has been listening to this people, and he sees that they have all of these misconceptions. They have false assumptions. They think God's with them just because they are the chosen people of God, but because they have built a false altar and they have used idols, well, then they're breaking the whole Mosaic covenant, and so their whole worship, everything about it is completely rejected. So Amos is, so you can hear in this passage here, in chapter 5, that Amos here, he quotes the people, just as you have said, God is with us, and so he's correcting them, and they are completely, they've missed the boat. And so he's trying to make it straight. And so we'll continue on. Because their present state of affairs was flourishing, as evidenced by their economic prosperity and military success, God must be on their side. So this is what they were thinking underneath Jeroboam II, because remember, this was the time of Amos. This was the best time that the nation ever experienced, on the past Solomon. So when under Uzziah and Jeroboam II, they had regained their national boundaries, but Israel had failed to worship at the altar in Jerusalem. Thus, they had no reason at all to doubt that this situation would continue to prevail in the future. How could the prophet threaten dire punishment for the chosen people? This present pericope, artfully constructed of a Woe Oracle, a rhetorical question, and a dramatic simile, comes to upset their misconception about what lies in store for the future of the northern nation. Then follows one of the rare occurrences in prophetic literature in which the reader overhears the words of the people themselves cited by the prophet. It is characteristic of Amos's polemical style to mention the sentiments of the people, or even to quote their popular conceptions in order to contradict them. For example, 5:18, 8:5, and 9:10. However, he avidly wishes that the people, what the people had said were true, but according to him, it would become an actuality only if they followed his exhortation. For if they seek good and not evil, then the Lord, the God of hosts, will really be with you as you claim. So this is how he opens up. But it's important here that Amos also overheard. Obviously, Amos says, "Woe to those, who desired the day of the Lord. So he had heard all these people when he was there talking about the day of the Lord. Now you got to remember that this is the first time the day of the Lord's ever been mentioned in the Bible. Amos is the first one to mention it, and so it was a popular opinion that was prior to Amos, and maybe even within the ancient Near East, as Stuart has stated, that the day of X, the day of whoever, is a day of battle for this particular person. So that may, and then it would have been taken over, as the day of Yahweh, in which now God is the one who's fighting on behalf of the nation to bring about salvation and deliverance. But for those who are not right with God, the day of the Lord is going to be like a thief in the night. Okay, then coming then to this slide, we are going to take note of the structure of the passage, and I wanted to somewhat give the bigger picture of all the way from 18 to 27 here. But on this slide, it's paying attention maybe, mainly to the first point of the passage. But as we come here, we're at point 3 here, and this is Amos's 2 Woe Oracles, and these are reversals of false theological assumptions. And it's you could actually say these are they're reversals of they're actually deadly false theological assumptions, because it falls underneath a Woe Oracle, something that you would make an exclamation of woe at a funeral. So there are certain assumptions that you can hold theologically that end up being deadly. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. That proverb will really fit here well, here in Amos 5:18 to 27. So coming here, we're looking here at the subpoint A here, the first Woe Oracle. And so this is Amos's reversal of Israel's false assumptions of the day of the Lord and worship. Okay, so this is going to break down into 2 main points. Okay, so the first main point is Amos's reversal of Israel's false assumptions concerning the day of the Lord, and this is found in 18 to 20. The second point is, we have a Jahwerede here in 20 to 21. So Yahweh kind of like butts in here, when Amos is just getting going here on the day of the Lord. So he kind of butts in here, and we have it's Yahweh Speech, because if you look at verse 21, it says saneti maasti hagechem. I hate, I despise your feasts. And then it goes on from there. Yahweh's, he rejects seven worship, their forms of worship. He rejects 7 of them. And we'll look, that would have to be itemized underneath here under 21 and 24. So this whole unit here, subunit here, would have to be expanded. But we're just mainly looking here at 20. This slide is focusing on 18 to 20. But you needed to see the bigger picture here. And then after Yahweh, states here, he has this rejection of Israel's false assumptions of worship. So it's Yahweh's rejection of Israel's worship and call to reform. So the highest point of the book of Amos, the main scriptural verse does come from Yahweh. in verse 24 here. And this is the the last part of this paranesis that Amos is putting forward here in this last section here of chapters 3 to 6. And then Yahweh's historical review of Israel's idolatry rounds it all out. So he talks about their present worship, and then he has a historical review of their past idolatry, and it all ends with a threat of exile, in verse 27. So this binds the whole unit together. This historical review beginning in verse 25, because it's all attached to Yahweh's critique of Israel's false assumptions of their worship, and that is all connected then to the Amos's reversal of Israel's false assumptions concerning the day of the Lord. So not only are they completely wrong about the day of the Lord, they're completely wrong about the way they worship, and that was the fundamental flaw. Remember, was Jeroboam the first, the son of Nebat, who did not allow Israel to go to Jerusalem, but he set up his two rival worship sites at Dan and Bethel. And by the time of Jeroboam II, all that had all expanded, beyond just Dan and Bethel. So we're just we're just working through the text, but looking specifically at 18 to 20. First of all, it starts off with Amos's first Woe Oracle with characterization. So that is, he starts off, woe, hoy, this exclamation, a cry of lamentation that one would make over, the dead. And the characterization, the woe is to those who are desiring, longing for the day of Yahweh. And we can, in scholarship, it's called the DOL, Day of the Lord. So the characterization, it's obviously then it's Israel's false assumption concerning the day of the Lord. So they have it all wrong. They think that that it's going to be a day of light for them and salvation and destruction of their enemies, and basically it's going to be their millennial, their what we would think of in the New Testament as the day of the Lord, the eschatological day of the Lord. But remember, for Israel, this was at this time the day of the Lord in the book of Amos is really a day of war of Yahweh, defeating his enemies and giving Israel, power and strength, and so that they're living, that they'd be living, I don't want to say high on the hog. That would be an abomination. But for them, it really wouldn't matter. Their whole worship's upside down anyhow. They're worshiping at the wrong altar, and that he said, do not seek Bethel, right? And so and remember here that everything in this passage is the worship. There's only one altar that God had set up, and that was in Jerusalem. So anything else would be a perversion, and from there, once you make that you go to a different altar, everything changes. There's no coming back from it. and there could be no true reform except for the destruction of those altars. Okay, so within this unit we have this, this Woe Oracle with a characterization. That's all in verse 18. Okay, and then the second point is Amos's rhetorical question and answers. So he has this question: why do you have this day of the Lord? Or another way you can translate it: what good is the day of the Lord to you? What benefit is the day of the Lord to you? And then Amos gives two answers. First one, it's a day of darkness, and secondly, in a negative way, it's not a day of light. Okay, and then he gives three comparative simile illustrations of the inescapability of the day of Yahweh. So he has a depiction of a lion, a man fleeing from a lion only to be met by a bear. And then somehow he manages here then to escape the bear. He enters his house, he leans his hand on the wall only to be bitten by a snake. So this comparative simile then is specifically designed to show that the day of the Lord is a day of darkness and it's not of light. And it can be compared to a man, running away from a lion only to be met by a bear, and then somehow managing to make it to his house. But when he gets in and is putting his hand on the wall to get his breath, the snake bites him and he dies. So that is the three comparative simile illustrations. And then then Amos is, in a way of inclusio, he goes back to his rhetorical questions, and he has a reversal. These are, it's a reversal of the assumptions of the day of the Lord. Is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light? Is not the day of the Lord gloom and there's no brightness in it? So he gives us four rhetorical questions, all expecting, the answer yes. It's the day is not the day of the Lord, darkness and not light. Well, yes, you're to answer yes. And is not the day of the Lord gloom and no brightness in it? Yes. And that what it does is that by inserting the three comparative similes, it brings home the point of his first rhetorical question, that the day of the Lord is not a day of light, it's a day of darkness, and it's not light. And then he gives the three similes to reinforce the point by giving this parabolic simile illustration. And then he comes back to the rhetorical questions, that it's dark and not light, and he does that in a twofold manner. So you have this so this passage, really you could look at this subpoint A here. Amos here has a single characterization statement. Okay, it's woe to those who desire the day of the Lord. Then Amos gives this rhetorical question with two answers, and then he gives three comparative simile illustrations, and then he gives four rhetorical questions. So you got the 1, 2, 3, 4 punch. And then Yahweh picks up and takes over at that point. And then once you come to verse 21, it's no longer Amos speaking. Now Yahweh jumps in on it, and it says Saneti Maasti Chagehem. And so this is Yahweh. I hate and I despise your festivals or your feasts. So these were all legislated feasts that Yahweh had had prescribed in the Pentateuch, but he did not they were not prescribed to an alternate altar. Remember, Yahweh was going to set up, his name was going to be placed at one altar, and all Israel was then to worship Yahweh at that altar, and that was in Jerusalem. So at the split, after Solomon's death between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, then Jeroboam caused the nation to sin and led them into idolatry. And Amos is just he's here for a mop up of you get 100 years of this going, and 100 years later, then after that split, basically, then we have the exile of Israel in 722, because this day of the Lord here, you cannot. I do have to say something here. You cannot think, when you come to the Old Testament, in some of its portrayals of the day of the Lord, you cannot take it as talking about Christ's second coming, because Amos, this has nothing whatsoever to do with, if you're reading Amos 5:18 here, about the day of the Lord, and you're thinking this pertains to Christ's second coming. I mean, it's, you couldn't be, that's way off. This refers to 722. The day of the Lord primarily is a day of battle, and there are many days of the Lord, so to speak. Okay, and I can actually pick out. And I was having a discussion with Phil Norcom last week, and in the New Testament there are actually 2 days of the Lord. You'll find the first day of the Lord is the second coming, and then at the end of the millennium, Peter makes mention of this in 2 Peter chapter 3, that at the day of the Lord, that the earth will burn up and all the elements thereof with intense heat. Well, that doesn't happen until the end of the millennium, when fire comes down from Yahweh and devours Satan, those who Satan deceived, to fight against the camp of God. So that would be the day of the Lord that Peter speaks of in 1st and 2nd Peter chapter 3, and then all the other instances of the day of the Lord in the New Testament would refer definitely to Christ's second coming. This other day of the Lord in 2 Peter, refers to the final day of battle, and where the wicked are consumed, and there's a new heaven and a new earth, and then the dead were thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, so that's important. But in the Old Testament, there are many days of the Lord, and the days of the Lord. The day of the Lord motif or concept should be understood as mainly, number one, as my old professor Rolf Knierim, his Doctor Vater was Gerhard von Rad, who had stated that the day of the Lord was primarily a day of battle, a day of war, a Yahweh war. And so there were, in the Old Testament, this in Amos, this is definitely talking about a day of war. But it incorporates definitely, we should incorporate with the day of the Lord, with the battle motif, is also some type of theophanic appearance of there's some type of special work of Yahweh where he actually, is coming into contact in some type of theophanic way. At least it's portrayed that way. And there are many days of the Lord. So Amos's day of the Lord here would have taken place in 722. So so you got to be careful when you're reading the day of the Lord in the Old Testament. And Amos would be the very first prophet to mention the day of the Lord. it's mentioned many times in the book of Joel, and Joel could be dated to the same time as roughly as Amos, but there's some people date the book of Joel all over the place, from very early to very late, and it's apropos that a lot of scholars looking at it is rather late, and it's just simply because there's not enough historical references in the book of Joel that where we can date it, and so it can be either dated early or late, and so I don't really want to push that too much, but when we look at different prophets concerning the day of the Lord, like if you go to Isaiah chapter 13, it's in the oracles against the nations that Isaiah brings up, and that oracle, the day of the Lord for Babylon, that was fulfilled by the Medes, and you can look in that passage in Isaiah 13, and it mentions the Medes, and they are the ones who brought about the day of the Lord. But you'll see that when Isaiah is writing about the day of the Lord, he uses proto-apocalyptic language that Matthew and the Gospels take on that reading, and make it literal for Christ's second coming. And as Phil had mentioned to me, every day of the Lord is colored by it's a day of darkness and not light. Somebody is going to lose and somebody's going to win, and it's not going to be Yahweh on the short end of the stick. Okay, when he comes to a battle, there's only one person who wins, and that's Yahweh. And you better be on the right side of Yahweh. So the day of the Lord for in the book of Amos is definitely a day of darkness and not light, because the Israelites were worshiping idols and false gods, and they had broken the covenant. But they thought that we're worshiping Yahweh. We just have our own altar here, that Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, set up, because God took away the kingdom, of the 12 tribes and ripped it apart and gave 10 to us, and only 2 tribes were left to Judah. So we were, that was done by the prophet of God, and which it truly was, but it wasn't. But they were still supposed to go to Jerusalem to worship. So so you'll see the within the historical books, the Deuteromistic assessment of Jeroboam the son of Nebat as he caused Israel to sin. And then if you look like at Zephaniah, the day of the Lord is the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. And you can see the day of the Lord in Ezekiel chapter, I believe, 30, about the destruction of Egypt, which would have come by Nebuchadnezzar. And so there are many days of the Lord, and it is a day of battle and some type of theophany language mixed with it. But every day of the Lord is a day of darkness. So Phil had made a good point that I think that I should emphasize here, is that in Amos, you're going to look at the New Testament, and you can see the how the New Testament is appropriating the language of Amos, that the day of the Lord, it comes as a thief in the night. It is a day of darkness, but it's a day of darkness for those who are not serving Christ. But for those who are serving Christ, the day of the Lord is not going to overtake us as a thief in the night. And so I just want you to understand that the day, in the Old Testament, the day of the Lord has a long history, but it's really the days of the Lord. And remember that the New Testament absolutely has 2 days of the Lord, one for the second coming and one at the end of the millennium, which Peter refers to in 2 Peter chapter 3. Okay, just to kind of wrap up this unit here about the 3 illustrations. So when a man flees from a lion, this is the beast that you're fleeing from, and what you're about to be met with next is really scary. Okay, so then after you somehow manage to escape, the lion, then you're met by this bear here, and this would have been the species of bear. It's just like a Syrian bear that's native, indigenous to the to the Middle East back even today, but even from back in the time of Israel. And then if you had managed to escape the lion and the bear, when you got in your house, this was the devil that met you. This serpent here is from Israel, and this is the horned viper, sand viper, and this little devil is what would bite you. So this is speaking about the inescapability of the day of Yahweh. And man, the devil, if it's not the devil, I don't know what is. Okay, then we will come here and look at John Hobbins's frame for evaluating poetry in the Old Testament, and I have taken license here to just offer a slightly different version of it. But anyhow, when we come here to look at the language poetically, it would be good here. What I wanted to look at least what was at least verse 20 here, from the previous unit that we just covered. And this is with the repetitious rhetorical question that kind of forms an inclusio back up here in verse 18. Lama ze lachem yom Adonai. What good is the day of Yahweh for you? Is it not? It is darkness and not light. So then he gives his simile here, as we mentioned, that talks about the inescapability of the day of the Lord, and then he drives home the same point of the question. They're desiring. Woe to those who desire the day of Yahweh. Is not the day of Yahweh darkness and not light? And then you are to palindromatically, is not the day of Yahweh gloom and no brightness in it? And so this is pretty, this is artistically, put together here. Halo choshek yom Adonai velo or. So this is, some of these poetic disticks here are quite long. And if we look at the Makkaves, they're saving us somewhat here, and it would make it a 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be a 4-3. This is why we have this here. The Makkaves, halo choshek is all to be, one accented word, prosodic word, and so is velo or here. But when you look here at the poetry, it's repetitious. It's not the day of Yahweh darkness and not light. is it not gloom, and there is no brightness in it? So he's showing you a positive and negative. The negative, and not light, and no brightness in it. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, is not the day of the Lord gloom. So you can see how it was, it was put together. It is a nice distich here that really pieces together the repetition of the rhetorical question of what good is the day of the Lord to you? It's a day of darkness, and it definitely has no light in it. So this is this brings some bit of closure here to verses 18 to 20, because then when we come here to verse 21, this is now a Jahwerede here. This is a Yahweh speech. So Amos was speaking up here in 18 to 20, but now, Saneti Ma'asti Chagechem Velo Ariach Be'atzerotechem. I despise your feasts, and I will not smell your, we'll say your solemn assemblies. Okay? For if you offer to me burnt offerings and meal offerings, I shall not accept. Peace offerings, and peace offerings of your fatlings, I will have no regard, or I will not look. Remove from before me the multitude of your songs, and you would say the music of your harps, I will not listen. But let justice roll as water, and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream, or a perennial stream. That's the idea. It's perennial. It's all year round. In which few rivers in Israel are perennial. So here we have Yahweh's reversal of their expectations or their assumptions of their worship. They thought that Yahweh's with us. Oh yeah, we have recourse to the sacrificial system. Well, Amos said, don't seek Bethel. And remember, it's Yahweh who roars from where? He roars from Zion. Okay, that's where Yahweh's roaring from. He's not roaring from Bethel. And remember that in the simile here that a man flees from a lion, where he's fleeing from Yahweh, because Yahweh is he roars from Zion and lifts up his voice from Jerusalem. So that whole the motto statement comes through even here in Amos's 3 illustrations of verse 19. But so as we continue here in this reversal of Israel's false theological assumptions of worship, we're going to see here that what does Yahweh hate and despise? Number one, their feast days, their solemn assemblies. 2, and he says their burnt offerings and their meal offerings he does not regard, and the peace offerings of their fatlings he has no regard. And then the multitude, or the multitude of their songs and their melodies of their harps he doesn't listen to. So what is he rejecting? 1, the feast. 2, the solemn assemblies. 3, the burnt offerings. 4, the meal offerings. And 5, the peace offerings. And then 6, the multitude of of their songs and the melodies of their harps. That makes 7. He doesn't listen to. But then comes the exhortation here. But let justice roll as water, and righteousness as an ever-flowing or a perennial stream. So, Yahweh is the one who is credited here, with this particular poetic speech here. All the way it goes. It doesn't stop until you get to 27. But Yahweh's, waxing eloquent here, and this is, by some, this is the greatest piece of poetic distich in the whole Bible. At least Martin Luther King thought so too, in his famous speeches before they murdered him. But so mishpat either means judgment or justice. But that's what the word means. It means both justice and judgment. And there is a third usage of, but it's a little more abstract. And as a custom, custom is another way to translate mishpat. But primarily in most contexts, it means justice and judgment. But every form of justice is a judgment, and every judgment is a form of justice. So in English we don't have a word that combines both meanings, but in Hebrew mishpat does. So what? There's something here, if you follow the logic, but let justice. We want to say justice roll as water. So what would prevent justice from rolling? Well, it's because people are damming it up, and that could be taken as a pun. Remember, they were casting righteousness on the ground and throwing justice out the window, just in the previous unit that we saw. So to dam up or stop the flow of justice is what they're doing. That's what they're doing. They by their practices here, they are not allowing justice to freely take effect. Because all you have to do is just let it go. Just let justice have its way. Because like now, in our country, there's two forms of justice. One for the political class, and then the rest for us. And there's been a lot of miscarriage by judges, by not allowing justice to roll as waters. Now, if we look at the second part of the distich, and righteousness as a perennial stream. So what this means here is that it's not just part of the year that they're doing righteousness, but it's perennially. This is referring to a stream that flows all year round. So they're wanting righteousness, which is the doing, righteousness, tzedakah, it refers to that which is right or straight. So you're just doing, what is expected, okay? And what is the right thing to do? That should be done perennially. If you do that perennially, then your righteousness is then going to be is going to be rolling down as an ever-flowing stream. So the two pillars really of society is righteousness and tzedakah and justice, or judgment here. It's the judgment that favors the ruling that comes forth in justice to what these two parties were fighting over. So justice is what needs to happen, and that's not what's been happening, either religiously or socially. And remember, when you go back to the OAN here, in chapter 2, when you look at the 7 things that Israel did, they were selling, children for something, for shoes or something, and they were, 2 men went into the same gal, into some whorehouse. So they were doing some very horrible things. And then they would, then they had the audacity to talk about, oh yeah, the day of the Lord, we're all, stoked, and they were just thinking totally, completely materialistically. What the day of the Lord would bring for them is just more of the same, and without regard to working righteousness. And so this is the verse 24 is the capstone really of the whole book, and this does function as a paranesis, this is Yahweh's advice. Paranesis literally means advice. So this is Yahweh's advice, but let justice roll as water, okay, not as some stone that can't roll. Water just rolls, okay, because it just flows, it runs, and it's not like some other form of material, like a rock with many sides that can't roll. Water just goes, and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream. Okay, then coming in for a landing here for Yahweh's speech as it continues here, but in prose. The poetry ceases here in 25 to 27. But this is Yahweh's historical review. And we know that this is for the present unit, because it ends here in verse 27. It says, and I shall deport you beyond Damascus, says Yahweh. God of hosts is his name. So this is, for sure, this just wraps up. This is the historical review of their false worship and their false assumptions, that they were worshiping God all the time. It says, so it says here, Higashtem li, right? Did you bring near to me sacrifices and grain offering in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? But you carried Sikhut, your king, and Kiyun, your images, the star of your God, which you made for yourselves. And then I shall deport you beyond Damascus, says Yahweh. God of hosts is his name. Now the Septuagint has slightly different wording here, because some of the words of the text are quite rare, and they were trying to get the sense of what it meant. But the Septuagint reads here in verse 25, you did not bring to me slayings and sacrifices in the wilderness 40 years, did you, O house of Israel? And the answer's a resounding no. But you took up the tent of Moloch and the star of your god Raphan, their images which you made for yourselves, and I shall deport you beyond Damascus, says the Lord. The God Almighty is his name. So So what we have here is that the Israelites, and especially, for this particular text, the northern Israel, they're not worshiping legitimately in the present nor in the past. That's the point. And so, therefore, the day of the Lord is darkness and not light. And these astral deities, your king here, Sikhut, your king, they're taking this word here, Sikhut, from Sukkot, and they're changing some of the vowels, and the tabernacle of your king, like as in the Feast of Sukkot, a little tent they would make, so that they took up, they bore this tabernacle of Milcom. And so remember, in the days when this Septuagint was being written, there were no vowels in text, so they were going from memory of either the oral pronunciation of these words or tradition. But anyhow, so this is, there's differences here between the Septuagint reading, and it's due to the difficulty in being able to understand words. So the Septuagint translator took a certain way to interpret the text, and then the Masoretes have, had this came with. For them, they produce these vowels. Sikhut and Kiyun would be representations of Saturn. So Saturn worship was at these astral deities. And remember, Saturn, we're saying astral because Saturn is a star. It's not a planet. It is a planet in the terms of that it's a wandering star, according to if you stick with the biblical text, there are no planets. There's wandering stars, those that left their habitation, as Jude speaks about, and then there's the fixed stars that go around Polaris, and so according to and it has here in the text, the star of your God. So that whatever you may think Saturn is, it's not what you think it is. You got to get into biblical cosmology, and you'll start seeing you'll have a different view of where you live. Okay. We will end this here, and we'll be back with you next time. Okay, this has been another session of Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Please like, share, and subscribe.